You definitely want to get buy-in, right? But we're going to talk a little bit about how to do so, because of course building equity is important. You know, I'm not going to buy in necessarily if I don't know why it's valuable to buy in. Now, I need to feel that there's something in it for me, as I think we talked about before. And how do I create that? Or at least, how do I take the intrinsic and existing interests and utilize that to my advantage? I'll give you one scenario very quickly before I move forward. So in my capacity as a principal, there were teachers who had approached me with regards to student behavior. Now, living in a quote-unquote out-of-town community, right, you probably would not have necessarily looked at the student behavior if you were from this immediate area and said, oh my goodness, these kids are so wild or whatever it is. But from the cultural norms that many of the teachers were coming from, they felt that it was a big deal. And I had a nice sized group of teachers that in one form or another had communicated this. It happened to be that I had just learned about in a training seminar about a program that teaches positive behavior, models, if you will, for schools and whatnot, values-based. And so it was a perfect confluence in terms of need and time. But I took advantage and I leveraged their intrinsic desire for a program like this and my knowledge about it, and we moved that matter forward. Now, was it the most pressing item on the agenda? Not necessarily. But sometimes you want to gain a win. Sometimes you want, as a leader, to demonstrate your leadership capacity. And you're going to say, what's my low-hanging fruit here? You know, where can I find easy success? Because if I have easy success, I build confidence, right? Winston Churchill talks about this, other leaders talk about this. Build slowly, find ways to be successful. Where's the path of least resistance? But it's got to be meaningful, right? If I just change for the sake of change, people are going to look at it as he's change-oriented, but I'm not gaining anything out of it. How can I go ahead and utilize and leverage those interests towards a common benefit? Okay? Now, here you have a snapshot of why failure occurs so often in the area of leading change, right? People don't understand or appreciate that change is a process, and it's something that needs to be strategically approached. So, for example, what is going to be the impact of change on the organization, right? Have we found a way to create a groundswell of support? Have we found a way to bring it to conversation, faculty meetings, team meetings, other opportunities, right? Giving people literature, things that a leader could do to broach a topic and see how it goes, right? Put it out there. Does it stick? Does it gain any traction? And once you start to gain a better feel for, or perhaps an innocuous survey, but sometimes you can frame the survey in a way that asks the questions that are strategically positioned to help you determine whether or not a particular change endeavor that you have in mind is a wise thing. Okay? So you're using feedback, you're using interest, you're using existing motivation as a way by which to move forward. And to use the example that I gave before, I remember very distinctly I had one outspoken Rebbe, one outspoken individual on the staff who was very much against it, not because he didn't think that good behavior was appropriate. He didn't see the behavior as an issue. Why are we focusing on this? That kind of, and a person who maybe wasn't the most savvy in general. And I remember once at a faculty meeting, he's sitting there and he's loudly challenging this well into the process. We'd already, began meetings about it in the previous spring. We're well into this process. And he, once again, now of course, all you need is one outspoken, loud individual at a faculty meeting to kind of hijack the whole thing. But what's really neat is that a female colleague jumped in, she said, Rabbi, we've already discussed this. We're past this. Let's move on. And I was like, saved. It was like, God sent an angel my way, and I was able to move forward. But it wasn't because, had I not done it this way, if Hofwood would have walked in and said, hey, we're going to do A, B, C, and Rabbi X gets up and says, no, we're not, Mrs. Y is not jumping in and saying, yes, we are, right? But the fact that she saw this as valuable, and because we had talked about it, and we had a committee to discuss it, and we had brought the whole faculty in to brainstorm about it, with applications, with voting, with feedback, with input. Now all of a sudden we had an agenda that we could move forward as a group. We're talking 50 people on the staff, and all of them are educators. Many of them, are of a similar, let's call it personal persuasion to ourselves. That's quite an opinionated group, I'll tell you. It's about as opinionated a group as you're going to find. you know, in any setting, in a work environment, etc. So if you're going to advance change there, you could, you know, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. You know, the old refrain. I felt pretty good about how we could move that process forward. Okay? Now, before doing anything, now I just want to remind everybody that the handouts are designed to go together with the PowerPoint. And so I'm looking at one. We are presently at number 3. Okay? So before doing anything else, you got to really take some time to be strategic, take some time to think. All right? Now, this to me is a powerful question. We've all had situations where we have felt somebody is trying to impose. Right? How did that make you feel? How inclined were you to listen? And in general, think about times where you had immediate interest and immediate compliance, immediate willingness, and where your resistance was higher. Okay? Now, would anyone like to say what are some factors that would contribute to resistance? Let's start with the negative side of the question. Where have you had a situation where somebody seemed to be putting something in your face, or whatever the proper expression would be, and you felt a need to hold back in some way, to demonstrate your own viewpoint?
Threatened.
Physically threatened?
Well, it doesn't have to be physical.
Or emotionally threatened?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? We've all had it, I'm sure, yes.
They're trying to give you extra work.
Okay. And sometimes, by the way, that could be a forceful resistance. Sometimes it could be what we call passive aggressive. Right? I'm going to be resistant. I'm not going to verbalize. I'm sort of sitting in my corner with my dark cloud hovering over my head. Right? I'm certainly not motivated. What would make you interested in somebody else's idea? Right? When do you like to listen? What would be some factors at play that would make you more positively inclined? Please.
If I felt they cared about me.
Ah, okay. Can you think of an example in a work environment where that happened?
Incentive.
Incentive? Okay, so care and incentive. What's in it for me? Yeah? Anything else? I'm sorry?
The short or long term.
In other words, what's at stake?
Yeah, what's at stake?
Okay. Right, so I think we all are hitting on the same common idea. If it's beneficial for me, or I'm just doing it because I love the person who's asking me to do it. Those are two main aspects here worth consideration. Because so often the asker makes all the difference. And we know this, anyone who's here to network, anyone who's here and understands business relationships, we talk about it's not what you know, right? It's often who you know and how you know them and how they're going to advocate for you or you for them, that kind of thing. And it's the relationship side. In today's day and age with social media and other things, we tend to be more distant in many ways than we have been previously because we have many more opportunities to connect. But those deep connections are the personal ones most times. Okay? Now here is a fascinating, at least from my perspective, a fascinating statistic or research. I don't have the source in front of me, but take a look here for a second. You've got 3 columns. You've got leader, vision, and reaction. So if you look over here, if you don't buy into the leader and you don't buy into the vision, then you have to get yourself another leader. Because clearly this person is not moving the organization forward the way that he or she needs to. If you don't buy into the leader, you still like the person's vision, research will say that more often than not, the leader still needs to go. It's a fascinating idea. The leader could be spot on, but if the leader has not demonstrated either capacity or has not won over those within the rank and file, that agenda is not moving forward. Where will the agenda move forward? Check out this one. There's buy-in for the leader. They don't really think the agenda is spot on. In most cases, we'll just say get another vision. We'll keep the leader on, but we'll try to reorient the leader towards our outcome. And here you have, of course, the best scenario. Leader buy-in, agenda buy-in, get behind the leader, let's go. Okay? Something to keep in mind. Any comments or questions? Yes, please.
What, did you establish, like, what makes the leader to-
No, we haven't talked about that, and we don't have the time to. That's an excellent question. It's a whole topic about leadership, and there are many, many variations. It's interesting because I write for different blogs and whatnot, and I have one that just published yesterday. It's called "What's All the Fuss About Leadership?" Because there's so many variations. There's servant leadership, ethical leadership, all sorts of, internal leadership, very, very many, a wide range of different leadership, what's called possibilities and permutations. There's no, in my opinion, magical formula.
If you have to sum it up like they do at Lincoln with that first line.
Well, we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about. To me, it's really important for a leader to understand the culture, for a leader to have a vision, create a vision that people can rally around, and for them to communicate it in a way that people feel good about and they understand the value. I mean, in essence, that's what we're talking about today. It's a strategic approach that means I know where I want to go, and that could be because I know, it could be because I've surveyed. Ideally, it would be the latter. I understand it because I've really gained. Now, you might say the rank and file don't get what needs to happen because you're getting different feedback. Then you need to educate. For example, I use the principal model because it's easy. I have constituents on the board, I have constituents in the community, and I've got my teachers as constituents, besides for the students. The teachers might have one opinion, the board has a completely different opinion. How do you bridge the two, right? And if I need to bring the board into it because ultimately they are my boss, right, whoever that boss would be, then I need to go back to the staff and say, hey, here's something to mull over. Here's some feedback we got. Here's a survey that we do with our parents, that type of thing. And that also doesn't always go over so well. What do the parents know? We've had plenty of these kinds of conversations because you're dealing with different agendas. And the role of the leader is to take, you had talked about before maybe bringing two different groups together, sort of bridging the gap. Bridging the gap could be a huge piece in all of this. And you have to set an agenda knowing that you've got this part of your constituency and this part of your constituency. And they've got different agendas. And how do you, as the leader, bring that process forward? Okay? And how do you do so? Sometimes it's through compromise. Sometimes it's through other processes. We don't have the time to get into all of those, but at least you see the dynamic at play, which I think is important. Okay? Now, I do mention here personal as well as the agenda, because you can't, as we'll see here, according to John Maxwell, who's a leadership expert, who's also faith-based and has a very strong following, he talks about you cannot separate the leader from the vision. If the leader is no good, right, and we can think of the president, for example, I don't mean exclusively the present president, but any president or any person. If I have a positive, for example, you always, I saw, I mean, in this case it might be a little bit different because the current president has always been more popular than his agenda has been. Personally more popular, which is an interesting gap between the two. But under normal circumstances, there's a close correlation between personal popularity, let's call it, and the agenda that that person is advancing, okay? Here you have on my side, I love it, so I'm going to say it even though I know we're running low on time. Rabbi Levin, who's the tzaddik in our time, you're probably familiar from Yerushalayim. The incident involves a store owner who had a store near him in Yerushalayim, in Mei Sharon, I think. And he was open on Shabbos, or nearby, I don't know exactly where he was. He comes in a Shabbos begadim, an hour, let's say, before Shkia, on Friday afternoon. And he just takes a chair, and he sits in the back of the store. And the store owner is surprised, why is he here? He's just sitting there, what's going on? And eventually he says, can I help you? No, it's okay. And he sits there, and Shkia comes and goes, and he's still there. And he says, now I know what you're dealing with. But fart, it's Shabbos. And from that point on, the store was never open on Shabbos again. He took the time to empathize with the person who had that struggle. I see your struggle. I connect deeply with that struggle. Afal Pikin, we have to move on. And so he did. And to me, that's such a powerful idea in the leader connecting with the people. Right, leading from, it's not really servant leadership. Servant leadership means I serve you. Moshe Rabbeinu is a classic example of servant leadership, putting the Anochi behind me and bringing forth whatever the klal needs. That's, in today's parlance, called servant leadership. It's a little bit different, but it's leadership through empathy. It's leadership through connection. If you care about me, right, we asked before, what's going to make you want to listen? Right? When the people that love you ask you to do something that's not pleasant, your reaction usually is much more positive than people who don't. Right? Why would I put myself out for somebody who is not nice to me, who doesn't care about me, who doesn't invest in me, doesn't whatever, not interested in seeing me promoted? Right? Why should I want to put myself out for such a person? But if somebody loves me, and they've demonstrated that through positive feedback, they've demonstrated that for opportunities for growth, they've demonstrated that through other ways, all of a sudden, you ask me to go the extra mile and stay an extra 2 hours on this weekend or whatever it might be, because we have a hard deadline and we need to get this done, I'm there. Because I know how much you care about me. And that relationship is reciprocal, which is nice. Now, let's see here. I think I lost the battery for a second on this, so bear with me for a moment. Okay. So we talked about building equity, extremely important, which requires a lot of listening. When people feel that you are listening, they feel that you care, and they know that what you decide, hopefully they know that what you decide includes your consideration. I cannot overemphasize the importance of the personal connection. In today's day and age, we're so electronic. I have an article that I wrote. It's called "What My Handwriting," what is it called? "What My Handwriting Says About Me." You can look it up. It's on Smart Blog. It's an interesting article because it's all about how electronic communication has distanced us, and the handwritten note is still the best way by which to make people feel that you care. And the handwriting I do is I don't write by hand anymore. Almost everything I do is digital. My handwriting was never great. I never went into medical school or anything like that, but it was never great to begin with. And it certainly hasn't been enhanced ever since I started utilizing my computer the way that I do. The article? It's called Smart Blog. This one, Smart Blog on leadership, I believe, because I write for two. I write for leadership and education, and it's called "What My Handwriting Says About Me." If you Googled either me or my Twitter handle, I think it's called @ImpactfulCoach, you will find all those articles. You can also visit the blog on my website, which, by the way, the contact information is on the paper in the footer. The website isn't, but the impactfulcoaching.com is my website. Okay? Here we talked about creating small wins, very important. Get people to have confidence in who you are and what you can accomplish. You don't have to change the world overnight. It's a very scary proposition, but small strategic change can be very beneficial because it doesn't require that much of individuals, and they start to say, hey, he or she, they have an agenda, they have a vision, this is how they accomplish it, I like the way they operate, right? And it doesn't require that much of me, so the resistance tends to be much lower, which is, of course, very important. And taking no credit is really key. It's easy for leaders to take a lot of credit because at the end of the day, they're behind everything, and most people will try to shine the light on them. But if the leader can reflect the light back to others with notes, with small gifts, with verbal praise, with public acknowledgement, depending on the nature of your organization, those are all going to help people feel like, hey, he really values what I have to say. And I will tell you, I've been in environments where I did not feel valued, and there's a difference in how you go to work every day. And I think most of us probably have had some type of experience where for certain people, I'll run through a brick wall, if I could, but I would at least try. Okay? For other people, I don't want to even bother picking up my pen. It's a totally different relationship because they don't know what I do, they could care less what I do, and we know what that feels like. Okay? Asking a lot of questions, trying to find out more before we do. Did you have a question or comment?
Comment.
Yes. If you don't mind, louder for the benefit of everyone.
I had somebody working for me, and I made a point of consistently giving him positive feedback. And I even mentioned to him that I had worked for bosses that were only there to say when things weren't good. And then when it came to doing things that were way beyond the requirement, he was there.
Beautiful. Yeah, so that really speaks to the same point. That's excellent. Okay? Again, we can't go through all of this. By the way, now, let's see where we're holding, just to get a context of the paper. We are at number 4, okay? And again, I put on more than the time allotted, not knowing exactly how much time we would have, figuring doesn't hurt. But I didn't realistically anticipate being able to do everything in the short time that we have. Letting their feedback, I know I mentioned this before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the more that you can find out from others what's on their mind, giving a suggestion box, giving opportunity for people to share ideas, right? What's working, what isn't working, and doing it not only at the beginning, but doing it throughout the change process, right? It's important for people because things could go sideways. right? You envision it's going to go this way, it sort of goes in a different direction. Is that a good change, right? Do we like how it's going? Right, we're off course, but not necessarily being off course, right? Just ask Christopher Columbus. Not always is being off course the wrong thing, so long as you know what the course ultimately should be. And that's something that's worthwhile to keep in consideration. Okay, tell me about, and the more specific you are, the likelier it is that you'll get valuable feedback. If I just say to you at the end of this workshop that I'm not going to formally ask you for feedback, that you're welcome to share it, but if I said to you, how was the workshop today? You might say, good, not so good, whatever. But if I said, what were your thoughts about my presentation on setting the agenda, and I maybe was even more specific than that. Did you like the think, pair, share exercise that we used in order to engage each other in conversation? And you'll say yes, and I'll say why, and maybe you'll specify. So now I have real feedback, other than, how are we doing? Right? How's it going? Open-ended stuff like that's not going to give you very much unless you're prepared to really drill down. Sometimes the best way to do it is in a personal engagement. Right, one-on-one meetings, small team meetings, things like this. There people feel like they can talk. If this group was tenfold, right, and we were in that big room over there, I don't know, maybe you'd still feel confident they should raise your hand and speak, I'm not sure. But many people would all of a sudden, you know, they get a little bit nervous because the group size, yeah, thank you, because the group size is larger. Okay, we are going to have to wrap it up soon, though I will tell you, since I do know that the room next door is not going to be used for a little while, I probably can't, it would be probably awkward for me to continue a formal presentation without all the stuff, etc. But if you had follow-up questions, I can make myself available. And I will be available for the balance of the day at my table, which is right here in the coaching section. Okay? Now, a superordinate goal sounds like, you know, some guy out of Marvel Comics or something, but superordinate comes from the research of Sheriff and some others in the University of Oklahoma back in the 50s, where they took Boy Scouts to a camp, to a large state park, and they developed separate teams and separate identities. Originally, the groups did not know of each other whatsoever, but then they created a very competitive environment. And they used superordinate goals by which to repair damaged relationships, by making them work together to get water, to work together for other reasons. They created scenarios where they dried up the water, and the boys had to figure out there was something stuffing the water supply, and they worked together to pull it out and to restore the water supply for the camp. They created a goal that everybody would benefit from. Those are the best. Because if the superordinate goal is there, and all of us stand to win. Right? When the power is out in the whole community, we all have a common interest. Right? But if it's Yanni's house versus my house, all of a sudden it's a different conversation. Okay? Building personal efficacy is another way by which to help people grow if they feel that they know what to do. You give them the skills. Don't just say we're going to make changes. They need to know how to do it. And that could be through professional development. That could be through sharing of literature. That could be through a variety of modeling. There are a variety of ways you could do it. But you have to be willing and able to say, here are the tools you need. And in fact, we're not going to touch this until I feel we really have a sense of where we're going with it. But giving them the confidence from the outset, all of those things can be extremely helpful. Okay? Delegation, right? Sometimes people want to lead change, they hold on to everything. You really need to be able to delegate and to know how to do so. Because ultimately, you can't do it all yourself. If you're in a leadership position, more often than not, you're overstretched and overtaxed as it is, and you need to be able to rely on the right people. They need to be properly trained and educated. They need to know what to do. And obviously, it could be a strategic process. Who is the right fit for this specific type of item that we need to move forward? Okay? And then as it relates to communication, I'm probably going to stop here and then take questions after this point. Because again, I could keep going, but I know that they're going to come in a second and say 1 minute, so we may as well be proactive. Communication would be letting everybody know from the outset, where are we going with this? Some of our participants at the beginning of our talk today said, one of the reasons change doesn't succeed is because people don't know what to make of it. Right? Why are we making this change? Is there a problem? Right? Are they going to fire me? Are they going to dissolve the whole division and outsource us to China? Or who knows where? India, or some other place, especially if we're in IT, or it's Israel even. So the answer is, no, we're not, but, ... Okay, this is where it came from, this is why we're doing it, or better yet, what do you think about it? As we talked about before, minimally, what is your position on this idea that we're considering? What are the pros, what are the cons? Obviously, the more you tell them, the better informed they are and the more intelligently they can respond to you. But at least you've given them a sense of where you're going, and they're not scared that you're after their bottom line. Because in a work environment, especially in today's climate after the Great Recession in particular, people have this underlying anxiety. You never know, when the day will come and how it'll come, right? People get surprises, unfortunately, all the time. And that's the outgrowth of this type of thing. So to summarize our conversation, again, we certainly could talk longer. I would love to be able to, and I only regret that we didn't have enough time to get to all of the points. But to summarize what we discussed today, we talked about agenda. We expressed it as a negative term, at least for most people. It tends to be somebody's imposition on somebody else. Somebody's imposition on somebody else where he or she has some agenda. We talked about why change often fails in organizations because the groundwork isn't laid for that purpose. And then we talked about how do we go ahead and at least begin the process of initiating change through building trust, through developing efficacy, which means competency, ability, by communicating effectively, by getting feedback and utilizing the feedback so that really, fast forwarding now to, I guess, the final slide here. The final slide would say, sorry, can I get it? Yeah. So that often by making their agenda your agenda, will help you make your agenda their agenda. So in other words, as you said initially, right, take the title of today's presentation and turn it on its head. Right? You think most leaders or many leaders may walk into a conversation and say, hey, this is my agenda. This is what we're going to do. Guess what? 70% of the time, something like that, or maybe even more, because 70% assumes all of the different types of change that we try to put out there. But more often than not, by a large percentage, such change is going to fail. Because what's in it for me? What are the implications for me? He doesn't care about me anyway. All the things we talked about. But when you walk into the conversation saying, I've been listening to you. This is what you've told me. Right? It's such a different conversation. I'll wrap up with this idea because it's a great nugget that I learned. When I first started implementing something in a classroom, for those of you who just walked in, I have a background in education, though I'm now in coaching and consulting. And I walked in doing a walkthrough. Walkthrough would be I'd walk in, I'd visit a class for 10 minutes, I would comment on what I saw, and then I would provide a note and maybe some feedback that I would share electronically. So the teacher would get it, and it was sort of like this unilateral communication. This is what I saw, these are my comments, this is what I want you to improve, that type of thing. Even with the compliments, it still felt like, this is what I want you to improve. But if I met with the teacher, and we conversed about it first, and I said, tell me about this, and tell me about this, and let me understand what you were thinking when you did this. Now, number one, the teacher fundamentally thinks that I'm on board with him or her. And number two, when I write the feedback, guess what comes at the beginning of any statement? As we discussed, as per our conversation. It's such a different feel to how you receive the feedback than I went into your classroom and this is what I saw. The teacher has it's like completely above and around me. And I'm not giving that person the cover, the respect that he or she deserves to be an active, I have no idea. As often as I do a walkthrough, am I there every minute of every day? Do I have context? And how often does a leader not have context because I'm busy? Right? We all know how busy the leaders are. They're busy beyond, right? As it is. We talk about delegation. There are other ways by which you can divest some of that. But at the end of the day, you're not in their space all the time. You certainly aren't walking a mile in their shoes. So what can you do to minimally get feedback and to develop this sense that he or she genuinely cares about me as an employee, about me as a person, and through that, you have a much better chance at getting those agendas to be advanced because they don't see it any longer as your agenda. They now start to see it as their agenda, and everybody likes to advance their agenda, as we know. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for coming.